Hello everyone and welcome to Fableheim and Aratus, Lord of the Dead. Our very first guide for Aratus, which has finally, at long last, left early access. Now I was thinking, what type of guide needs to be done for Aratus? And in the end, what I came up with was a creation guide. Everything in Aratus, the talents, the magic, which I guess is talents, the graveyard, the alchemy, it all revolves around making your creations better and more efficient. So today, we're going to go over every single creation as an overview, explain to you how I think they are useful, because each minion is useful in its own peculiar way, and put together the puzzle of how to create a group composition that succeeds and doesn't die. 'Tis the plan. Also, for any of them that you have to unlock, I'll also go over how to unlock them. Most of them are pretty easy. They did a great job about making it so that creations just unlock as you naturally play, but a few of them are a little tricky, so we'll touch on that. But before we can begin the overview of each and every creation, I have to talk about stats. Now here you can see the creation panel for the skeleton. Let's go here. The character panel for the skeleton. Most creations have their own feature, which is this little blue star. For the skeleton, it makes the skeleton immune to all buffs and debuffs, which sounds terrible, but it's actually quite useful. And of course, you can make it better by his unique item. Each creation has their own unique item, which is an item that can only be equipped by them. For example, the skeleton is the witching bone, enchanting bone, whatever they named it now, which makes it so that he can indeed be buffed, but he's still immune to debuffs. It's very good, highly recommend. Now, as far as what you see here on the stat panel, each creation and every enemy has their own allocation of stats. Attack is just how much damage you're going to do. It affects both physical and magical damage, so there's no, split there. For Dread is basically attack damage for stress. Very similar to Darkest Dungeon, if you're familiar with that, the enemies will have a stress bar that you can reduce and drive them insane, which is fun. That's my preferred way to play, even though I know some people just like to kill them all. Now, accuracy is actually quite interesting in Aratus. Accuracy is your chance to hit, but for every point of accuracy you have over 100%, it will start to chip away at the enemy's evasion, which is the next stat. For every point of evasion, it increases your chance that you will dodge the next incoming attack. Very helpful. Some builds revolve entirely around this. Even one of their creations is all about evasion, so just a defensive option to keep in mind. Now, luck is the chance of hitting a critical hit, but if you or the enemy have negative luck, then it increases the chance that an attacker will inflict a critical chance. So there are some interesting builds and ideas of nerfing enemy luck so that you can just guarantee crits straight to their face. And it's actually kind of fun. Of course, Vigor is your HP. The skeleton has 100. You can increase it in a myriad of ways. Armor is how much mitigation you have against physical attacks. Some characters, most tanky characters, do want some armor in some way. Even though there is some debate I've read where just pumping straight Vigor is more useful. Personally, I do like the mitigation. And on the note of armor, there is resistance. This reduces the damage that you take from magical effects, both enemy and friendly when we're talking about the Lost Soul and the Lich. Block will block the next physical attack, completely negates it. And ward is the same thing. The next magical attack or magical effect will eat a ward. The skeleton, poor boy, he has none of them. You can give him some, but it's very expensive. Initiative determines the turn order. It's a very basic turn order, and initiative is what decides who goes fast. A fast skeleton, have you ever heard of it? I have. I love the fast skelly. Now, all of these stats that I've just explained, you are in control of upgrading them. Every time a character levels up, you will gain 2 skill points. As you can see over here, you get to decide how you want to allocate them. Of course, as you continue to level something up, it will cost more. For example, if we were to level the skeleton's attack, it would cost 2 points, and the next upgrade would cost 4, and we can only do it 6 times.
Terror or lethality today?
Thank you, Aratus. Now, you can also get points by upgrading their parts. So you can see down here, this is what it takes to make a skeleton, a skull, a bones, 1 armor piece, and 1 weapon piece. There are varying rarities. The common, which is what the gray ones are, do nothing, except, put them together. The uncommon will give you 2 extra points, the rare will give you 8 extra points, and the legendary will give you 14 extra points. So you can see how it's very valuable to collect higher quality rares, higher quality parts, which you can go down the alchemy tree to increase your chance. And even at the very end, if you're committed, you can get an additional part. Good fun. I love the alchemy tree. I know it's not the most liked in the community. A lot of people like magic and ire, but you know what? I love alchemy. It's great fun. Back to the creation thing. And every minion, of course, has their own abilities here. They have all of them unlocked by default. They can use all of them in any battle. But each one has 2 separate upgrade paths. And the path that you choose is very, very important to the character's speciality. Whichever path you go down, of course, you will get some passive stats. These have been rebalanced since early access to better accommodate this new stat system. But the effects have, well, they've been rebalanced too, but you get the point. I will be talking about this more for each character as we go down the overview, which begins now. So hello, if you skipped my lovely introduction, now is the time for overview of every single of Aratus' wonderful creations. The skeleton, the master of mediocrity. Now the skeleton, even though he is the master of mediocrity, I do like him a lot. In fact, in our last playthrough, Skeletor, first of his name, Feller of Titans, was very useful. And that was because of his ability Smite, which allows him to attack twice and deals bonus damage or he can attack again for every buff the enemy has. So this is an offensive version of the skeleton. Of course, his other offensive ability ignores armor. It's just a single strike. Very powerful. Very good, too. So I had a lot of fun messing around with the skeleton. The build with it was basically you get the witching bone, make it so that he can get buffed, and then buff him to oblivion, and use the lost soul to apply buffs to enemies so that he can just smite the show-offs all day. It was good fun. I loved it. Now that doesn't, just because the skeleton has a very offensive build, doesn't mean he can't be defensive or fit into a stress build. The ultimate ability, which costs wrath for everyone, the ultimate ability for the skeleton just does stress damage to all enemies, and it can even force them to undergo an insanity check, which just basically means they're either go insane or they're going to get inspired. Can be incredibly powerful. Of course, the other way I really like using the skeleton is Unnerving Fortitude. This is a stance that encourages enemies to attack the skeleton, and if they attack him, he will counterattack with stress damage. It can be really fun to just plop him up on the front line, enter this stance, and just watch the enemies slowly drive themselves insane. Kind of a torture type thing. Masochistic? Sadistic, that's the word. A sadistic ability that I love a lot. And that is the skeleton. My biggest advice for the skeleton is that don't underestimate him. You begin with one, so you can very easily play around with one. But don't underestimate him. He may be terrible in most video games, in most circumstances. But here in Aratus, he can be an important puzzle piece. Another character that you begin with is the zombie. Now the zombie was not what I expected. He is a buccaneer, I like to call him. He has a giant cannon. As you can see here, look at it. Isn't it beautiful? And his job is actually magic damage for the most part. Some of his abilities do have physical attack, but he does a lot of magic damage. Now, I haven't used the zombie much. He can output some crazy damage, but the biggest thing for him... This is a nice ability. But the biggest thing, I think, is if you wanted to use him in a magical / ignition build. Ignition, of course, is the damage over time effect from burning people. Even though this is good. He can be a decent debuffer as well, apparently. But if you like burning people, the zombie is probably going to be one of your go-to characters. He does also have a chunk of hit points, which I utilize to attack people, unlock the ghoul and whatnot, but that's basically him. It's very straightforward. Just throw him kind of up front, start burning people, start shooting people, and have a grand old time. Another of the starter creations is the Bride of Aratus. Now, unlike the zombie, the Bride of Aratus is incredibly versatile. Beautiful. She's an archer-type character, and she can apply both physical damage and stress damage to slowly chip away at enemies' HP or their sanity. My favorite ability from her is the Warning Shot. It is a stress damage attack that will move an enemy back, and it will interrupt stances, which can become incredibly useful later on. Of course, if you are also trying an ignition build, like with the zombie, she does have her own ignition ability. It's not bad. I wouldn't say it's good, but it's not bad. Just single target ignition. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about it. There is also a build using Overwatch, which is whenever an enemy moves, you deal physical damage to it. You just put her in the stance and she'll go crazy. A number of characters can help facilitate this, including the skeleton who we saw earlier, with his own pushback, which also interrupts stances. So yeah, an interesting thing to keep in mind. And if you do enjoy critting, the Bride of Aratus is a pretty good critter. Her Q ability, the chest piercer, and her wrath ability both inflict bonus damage on crit, and can be fun. I like her a lot. She kind of just fits into anything. She's your jack of all trades, master of none type character. The next starting creation is none other than the Dark Knight. Oh, the Dark Knight. The Dark Knight's good. He's strong. If you want a character that can just sit in the front line and look intimidating, congratulations, you've met him. Now you might be thinking, he only has 75 vigor. How can he stand in the front line and be intimidating? And part of that, there are two reasons. The main reason is because look at this defense. He scales armor and resistance incredibly fast. It's so good. And part of that reason is because some of his attacks, such as Heartless Slash, and you can make this do it as well, they will gain bonus damage based off of the Dark Knight's armor and resistance. So you can kind of double dip on buffs here. You can scale your attack to increase your damage, but you can also increase your armor and resistance to deal more damage. So sometimes the skeleton paired with the Dark Knight goes really far, of course because of the skeleton's buff. I upgraded Embrace of Mediocrity to Strength of Mediocrity, just exponentially increasing the double dippage of the Dark Knight. But that isn't even his most powerful use. Dark Knight also is incredibly good with stress damage, and the reason is because entirely of Futile Hopes. By default, this is each time an enemy receives a buff, the Dark Knight deals stress damage to them, but you can upgrade it so it's each time they receive a debuff, which you can work into just about any build. And of course, curses count for that, so that anyone that's dealing stress damage per turn, this will apply as well. And back to his durability, part of the reason is because of his ultimate ability, he heals stuff. He heals himself, and it ignores ward. And it's just like a pure, the damage it says there, pure damage is always going to be 12 to every enemy. I mean, unless you upgrade it to make it that it's 35 on a single target. But my point is, reliable, restores HP, has incredible mitigation, Dark Knight, strong. Now one of the characters that synergize incredibly well with the Dark Knight is the Banshee. The Banshee is your starting character for stress, for the most part. She deals single target stress, she deals group stress, she debuffs. She's the only character in the game with a stun. Even though you do have to be in the first or second slot to do it, she is very strong. And part of what I think is the strongest comp in the game. The Banshee plays an important role in that. But she is incredibly squishy.
You have the honor of receiving my personal touch.
You hear that, guys? We have his personal touch. She is incredibly squishy, so do keep that in mind. It is the one risk of running her for the Howl. Otherwise, she likes to be in the third or fourth slot. And very similar to the Bride of Aratus, she has her own stance, where whenever an enemy moves, she'll deal stress damage to it. So you can try and double dip on both of them using their stances, but one of them deals physical damage, one of them deals stress damage. So you're kind of splitting yourself a little thin with that. But that is the Banshee. Now, the Wraith. The Wraith is the other stress character that's starting out, and he does only stress. If you look at his stats, you can't even upgrade his attack. He is purely dedicated to stress damage. If you do want to do the stance movement build that I mentioned with the Banshee earlier, he can help facilitate that with his ultimate ability. He will cause all enemies to randomly swap positions, unless they have ward and block it. But that way, the Banshee stance goes off on everyone. It's a lot of good fun. And I mentioned curses earlier, and the Wraith is an excellent sort of curses. An excellent source of those curses. I prefer to upgrade it to Cursed Flames, so that he hits the all first 3 slots. It's very good. And of course, he has a single target one. Using this to remove initiative can make the enemy a lot slower, and it can synergize with the character later on. It's always good fun. He does have his one single damaging attack that I mentioned earlier is Cold Grasp. It just makes it so the enemy can't move, and I really haven't found a use for that. I mean, it's useful when it's Death Grasp, and you can remove their resistance as well for certain group compositions, but otherwise, I'd recommend using the Wraith for your big, heavy stress target. Stress damage target. Boom. Now the last character that you can start with is the Infested. You don't start with him by default. The Infested is a character that I've been completely ignoring these features. I did that for the longest time when I first started. We'll go back in a minute. The Infested is a character that you get for buying the support pack. Now this is a $10 DLC that unlocks a number of things now. It gives you the art book, the soundtrack, the dev diary? May not be true. And it unlocks the Infested, and it gives you an additional skin for every single creation. For example, look at the zombie. He's kind of ugly. Now he's red and ugly. Or the Dark Knight. Now he's all black. Now he's a different shade. So yeah, that's what you get if you buy the support pack. I did because, again, the main point was to support the developers who were in early access for a long time, and now we're out. So it worked. Okay, real quick. The feature of the Brand of Aratus gains luck against female enemies. I actually didn't know that. The Dark Knight cannot be critically hit. Is that new? This makes him even better as a frontline tank, by the way. The Banshee, the chance of enemies to escape increases by 2% each turn until it reaches 10%. Doesn't stack. So it takes 5 turns, then it reaches 10%. I didn't know that either. The Wraith has no feature, and the Infested deals sanity damage to all enemies when he dies. He explodes because he's infested. Alright. Those were all of the beginning characters. When you start the game for the very first time, you'll have access to them. You can create them, you can play around with them. But now, every creation forward will be an unlockable, and let's talk about the Mummy. The Mummy. The way that you unlock the Mummy is by getting a minion to level 5. That's not very hard. You'll probably reach this by halfway or 3/4 through the first floor. Boom. The Mummy is another frontline-ish character. His feature is that each enemy that successfully attacks the Mummy loses 10 luck. This is what I mentioned earlier with the luck. The Mummy wants to debuff luck people so that he can do stuff and things. His Amplify Curse's ultimate ability additionally deals 1 stress damage for each point of negative luck that the target has. It's not that big of a deal, but with the Mummy decreasing enemy luck, that is increasing your friendly chance to crit them, assuming the enemy goes negative. Now, the Mummy does primarily stress damage as well, just like the Wraith. And I didn't even talk about the Infested, did I? Oh dear. The Mummy and the Infested both primarily do single target stress damage, except for this Hex Beam, which has been nerfed I don't even know how many times. But if the Mummy has a debuff, he deals bonus damage to all enemies with this. How many times has this been nerfed? It's like 3, right? It's been nerfed a lot. He can also remove debuffs from allies, which is very helpful. And yeah, he has a single target curse. He's a pretty good target. I do like throwing him up front. The only thing is he's not the most durable of frontliners. He can even upgrade his own armor and resistance. But I mean, he's good. Okay, back to the Infested, who I skipped over briefly. The Infested is much like the Wraith, where he is pure stress damage. I mean, he has this. But you probably want to use Slingshot just to reposition, because it moves him back 1. The Rancid Breath, very powerful single target curse. He has Pestilent Rain, which is one of the best ways to kill people with heart attacks, because it hits 4 times. And if an enemy has 0 sanity, each of those hits is going to roll the chance to kill them. Very useful. His ultimate ability is also incredible, permanently cursing all enemies for stress damage. But he is incredibly squishy.
Perfection takes time and proper ingredients.
It's true. So, if you do use the Infested, just keep in mind that he is a bit squishy, a little vulnerable, and he might need some assistance. Or, just throw him in there and blow up to deal sanity damage. Next is the Lich. To unlock the Lich, you just need to slay 60 enemies. Very straightforward. The Lich is an incredibly powerful spellcaster that also has a surprising amount of utility. His feature is that he increases Aratus' spell power by 10. Aratus' spell power will either reduce the cost of spells or sometimes increase their efficacy. Each spell will tell you how spell power affects it. Useful. Not something I think you would bring a Lich for, but a fun side effect. The Lich is a squishy spell caster, so you do want to keep him kind of near the back. The thing the Lich is really good for is damaging your own friends, which you probably don't want to, unless you need to unlock the ghoul, who we'll get to later. But his Bone Shards is a random attack, but you can upgrade it so it will attack 2 random enemies and the ally in the front position, which you can negate this downside sort of, later on. He can also cause it to rain fire on everybody, including friends and allies, well, except himself, which both of these abilities do an insane amount of damage. But, you know, at what cost, right? The Lich can also heal people with his sacrifice. He has an incredible buff that moves people forward, and he can summon a skeleton if there's an empty slot open. Very powerful. But what I use the Lich for the most is Toxic Cloud. Now you may look at this and go, well, that's not that great. It's just a trap on the floor that stresses people out, right? You upgrade it so that any enemy in the cloud loses all armor and resistance. It is incredibly potent with other attacking type characters. Not very useful if your goal is sanity damage, but I mean, even then. That's a lot of stress damage to deal. The Lich, a powerhouse with very little protection. Whoops. Next is the Headhunter. His feature, enemies have minus 15% chance to escape while in battle with the Headhunter. Yeah, because he's there to take their heads and kill them. To unlock the Headhunter, you have to defeat 2 bosses. So there's a boss at every single floor, so by the time you're entering the 3rd floor, you will have access to the Headless Headhunter. The Headhunter is a glass cannon. The definition of a glass cannon. Every single one of his abilities is just to kill people. Apparently has a stress damage one. Use this to remove all evasion, and then you just hit things really hard. That sounds fun. But the fun thing about the Headhunter, I don't really have much to say here because I haven't used him a whole lot. He just deals a ridiculous amount of damage to a lot of random enemies for the most part. And you can use him to basically... Which one is it? Ah, yes. You can use this to help farm out additional parts using Profitable Bounty. Or, you can just one-shot things that aren't bosses. Whatever's up to you. So yeah, if you like glass cannon physical damage, here's your lad. Next is the Shade. The Shade is the most singularly powerful character in the game, in my opinion. He can't do much by himself, but with friends, good character. And to unlock him, you need to trigger Insanity on 80 enemies. So you'll definitely want to be using the Wraith and the Banshee, and the Bride really, if you want to unlock the Shade, which I do recommend you do, because the Shade is strong. He is weird and strong. So he does have a stance like others. Whenever one of your friends is attacked, or you deal damage back. It's not that big of a deal, but it can be helpful to chip away at things. His feature is very similar. If an enemy attacks the Shade and misses, either because their accuracy was too low or the Shade evaded him, he will attack them back for a certain amount of magic damage, which you can upgrade. There is one build where you just dump evasion and dump attack, and you just wait for things to hit you. That's a real thing. But what makes the Shade truly remarkable is Gloom Claws. This deals deals damage equal to 80%, or bosses 40%, of the sanity that the target is missing. Doesn't miss, ignores ward. So the idea here is that you're using a stress damage team, you're trying to drive people insane, and then one turn passes and the Shade just one-shots them more or less. It's so good. Of course, his ultimate ability is also quite powerful. He summons a trap on the ground, and anyone that moves into it loses 30%, or bosses 15%, of their current figure. It's not going to kill anyone, but if you just have nothing to do and you plop that down, you can deal a lot of damage. Of course, he also has an accuracy debuff, which is awesome and very helpful.
Reinforce the bones, strengthen the flesh, blacken the spirit. Yeah.
Oh, I love Aratus so much. So that's the Shade. Incredibly powerful character. Highly recommend that you use him. But he is really weird, so it might take some time. It took me a lot of time to adjust to him. Next is the Vampire. To unlock the Vampire, she's a bizarre character, but we'll touch on it. To unlock the Vampire, however, you have to convert 3 enemies into a Vampire. You do that, not alchemy. You do that by unlocking the talent Blood Curse. This reduces enemy luck, and once they die, if they escape, Aratus will receive a vampire. So you want to be doing this with a stress build that doesn't just kill people and lets them run away. You can also increase chance of escaping by using the Banshee and some other items. Really, if they escape. I thought it was if... Whatever, it doesn't matter. So you just need to get Arcana onto Diluvia and Magic, and then get the Blood Curse. Again, reducing luck is not that bad of a thing. Early on, minus 25 luck is like bringing things into the negative. So you have a higher chance of critting them, your mummy does more damage. It's a pretty good debuff overall. The Vampire's feature is that gains plus 6 attack each time an enemy escapes or goes insane. So you can kind of synergize her with a stress build and do some like half and half things, where as you drive people insane, the vampire grows stronger and then just starts obliterating people. If you do like that idea, the vampire's ultimate ability is Bloodthirst. Until the end of battle, she'll recover 50% of her physical damage. For all physical damage she deals, she recovers 50% of that as health. It's very good. So as you continue to increase her attack, you'll increase her healing, which allows her to take more hits, but she is on the squishier side. So at higher levels, that's usually not how the vampire is used. On harder difficulties, the vampire kind of is used as a support character, because she can deal damage to herself to give us additional wrath, to enable other characters' ultimates, or she can use this to just use Hysteria to just remove enemy HP. There was a strategy at one point in time that combined this from the vampire with the Shades one, to just remove percentage HP and then have the ghoul eat them. You can still do that, but these days that makes it so that the ghoul or the enemy doesn't drop any parts. So, 50-50. It really depends. Do you need parts or do you need to kill the thing? But that's for the ghoul. So we'll talk about that later. And that's about it for the vampire. She is a bizarre character, but she is incredibly powerful, and I like her a lot. Again, for Good Always Wins and Eternal Harvest, you probably want to look at using her more in a support or ancillary type fashion than as a frontline brawler. But on More Pain, it's good fun. Next is the Blood Phantasm. To unlock the Blood Phantasm, you need to use a 7,500 Wrath. The vampire who we just spoke of is pretty good at generating Wrath, and basically any character can use the Wrath. I do have one strategy for unlocking a few characters at once, and that is using the Lich to generate Wrath, but we can talk about that a little bit later. So eventually you will get this, but you can of course make group compositions dedicated to trying to spend Wrath to, unlock him. You can also begin battle with Wrath by building the Abode of Wrath in the graveyard. It's up to you. But again, this is one that you'll just eventually get. And for the Blood Phantasm, he is an interesting character. Because you would think this giant floating Blood Phantasm is out to kill people. And sure, he is. He has some great abilities for killing people and for taking damage, or recovering damage. For example, his Phantasmal Assault. It attacks twice, and with each swing he heals 6 vigor. That's always just 6 vigor, it's not like a percentage or anything. So not bad. But what he's really, really good at is healing his team with Transfusion. Now this doesn't sound like a whole lot, entering the stance so that whenever he takes damage, 40% of the Phantasm attacks, it heals his team. But if you upgrade that to Rage Injection,
tools can be made better, deadlier.
Of course. You will also give all of your allies +1 attack and plus dread until the battle ends. My favorite capacity for the Blood Phantasm is to just throw him up front, put him in the stance, and let him buff the entire team. Very strong. His Wrath ability is Hate Eternal. I use this more for repositioning because it pulls you up forward than the fact that it deals damage to all enemies and sets them on fire. But if you're looking for an ignition group, maybe the Blood Phantasm has a part. Because it can increase your friend's damage to increase their ignition, and he can ignite himself. Just a thought. There is also the possibility that you use him as a debuff on a debuff team, because his Chains of Anger, which is his 3rd and 4th slot ability, deals damage based on enemy debuffs and buffs. So there are a few capacities to use the Blood Phantasm, but again, I like using him as a Rage Injection, really. Next is the Lost Soul. This character and I have a rough relationship. It took me forever to figure out how exactly to make her work, but I'm glad I did. I think she's a great character, just a bizarre one. To unlock the Lost Soul, you need to debuff enemies 250 times. It is important to note that with this, curses do count, so that with the Wraith, you can use Cursed Flame to get 3 of that, basically. Every single time. I do love the Wraith. Now, the Lost Soul has no feature. Did you have a feature? Oh yeah, when the Blood Phantasm dies, he heals people. I forgot about that. Because my Blood Phantasm doesn't die. Roll the clip of me losing like 4 Blood Phantasms back to back to back. Anyway, the Lost Soul has no features. And she is bizarre in the fact that she actually buffs her enemies. But she is also the only one with a single target heal. The downside is that next turn, the target that you healed is going to get shot by you for about the same amount of damage. So usually you don't upgrade your own attack, so that you don't shoot your own friends harder. But you could. Nothing's going to stop you. So the way that I like to use the Lost Soul the most is that I use Dubious Boons to give a friendly target +2 wards to block the next magical attack or magical effect, and then you use Benevolent Spirit to heal them, and then the free damage attack thing that you do to them next turn will be blocked by the ward. Also, just giving people wards is very strong against certain compositions, so just a thing to keep in mind. But the Lost Soul also benefits with 2 other characters with the whole giving buffs to enemies. One of them is the Dark Knight that we mentioned earlier. This ability here, each time an enemy receives a buff, you attack stress damage to them. So that's one combination. Of course, that means if you go the other way, where
my undead tools can be made better.
If you upgrade Futile Hopes to No Tomorrow, that synergy doesn't exist anymore, but, it's a choice. And of course, with the Skeleton, Skeletor, Feller of Titans, first of his name, you can use the Lost Soul to buff enemies to smite the show-offs better. Those are 2 synergies that I really enjoy. But other than that, the Lost Soul is completely a support character. You do not want her up front. You do not want her to be dealing your damage. Her ultimate ability just removes all buffs and debuffs from all enemies. And for each one that was removed, the Lost Soul allies gain +1 damage until the battle ends. It can be incredibly helpful, but I was quite forgetful of it, so up to you, really. Can you remember? I don't know. The Bone Golem. This is the one that took me the longest to unlock, and it doesn't seem like it would. Its requirement is to collect 70 bones. It's important to note that the alchemy transmutation does not count for this. So you cannot just waltz over to alchemy and turn, a piece of flesh and heart into a bone and it will count, because it will not. It will not count. So you have to get them the old-fashioned way by killing people and taking it from their rotting corpses. The Bone Golem is your frontline, beefy boy, hit me type character. He has 165 vigor, no feature. But despite him being the frontline hit me boy, I use him in a support capacity. I think that's where he shines. Part of that is because his ultimate ability deals damage to all enemies and has a chance to stun them, which is pretty good. And he can also apply block to allies. Remember, block will negate the next physical attack, no matter what it is. And that's pretty good. You can, of course, change it to do 1 block, 1 ward, which, I don't know. It would depend entirely on the fight if it's better to have both or just to block. But he can also heal himself, so being in the front line, if he gets, pushed back, he can easily move forward. He moves a lot. Actually, he doesn't move as much as I thought he did, but he can move a lot, if you so desire. And for all the vigor that he's missing, he does bonus things with his attacks, which synergizes with the fact that his incredibly powerful abilities, like the stun and the block giving, do take his own HP. I've never had a lot of success with the Bone Golem, but I can see why he would be successful. I kind of have used him as my main tank is healing sort of situation, and now I need you to just be there while my other characters are healing. The Fallen Dhampir. I love the Fallen Dhampir. I've killed so many of these. But the way that you unlock the Fallen Dhampir is by converting 3 Dhampir to your team. The way that you do this is that you encounter a Dhampir on the 3rd floor. Spoiler alert. You encounter a Dhampir on the 3rd floor, and their feature will tell you that if she is alone in her squad while insane, the battle will end, and she will join Aratus. So you want to kill or drive off the rest of her compatriots, then drive her insane, and then the battle will immediately end, and you have yourself a new Dhampir. Do that 3 times, and you can make your own. The Dhampir's feature, however, is that she will gain +1 attack and +1 dread until the battle ends each time that she receives damage. Despite what that may lead you to believe, the Fallen Dhampir is not very good at taking damage. She can, because of her stance here. This is which one is it? Riposte. She will deal stress damage and interrupt stances, very powerful. And then whenever someone hits her, she will counterattack. And you can upgrade this so that she will heal for 33% of the damage she had dealt. That does make her a little bit more durable, but she's still no Black Knight. Don't get it twisted. The thing with the dhampir, there are a few things you can do, and the stance thing is one of them. Another one that I have tested out and found some success with is a trap. You put this on a single target, and the enemy inside cannot move and loses all initiative. Why is that important? Removing initiative, of course, slows down the enemy, but it also helps one of your characters that we're approaching, the unfrozen, deal more damage. So that was an interesting synergy that I enjoyed, but meh. Now, the Valen dhampir really shines with her 2 wrath abilities. Much like the lich, the lucky sod, she has 2 of them, and they're basically the same thing. One of them, Pain Blast, will deal magical damage 5 times, and then the enemy will lose all resistance until the end of battle. The other one, Sundering Squall, is the same thing but for physical damage, and the target will lose all armor until the end of battle. This can be incredibly helpful with overcoming natural counters, like for example if you encounter a structure that has 30 armor, which isn't that uncommon. Later on, you can strip all that armor and suddenly the giant statue that you couldn't kill with your swords will now instantly die to your swords. Very helpful. But that is the dhampir. I do enjoy her. I don't know. Next is the ghoul. Now the ghoul, I think, is one of the trickier characters to unlock because it asks you to do something that you don't really want to do. And that is to deal 3,500 damage to your own team. The easiest way to unlock this is to use the bone golem's self-destruct ability. This will instantly kill the bone golem and count for his entire HP. A way to mimic this if you don't have the bone golem unlocked is to use the lich's ability to sacrifice a friendly ally. So don't accidentally press this button. But you just kill an ally, dealing all of their HP with a single spell. The way I did it, however, is a little different. I used the Rain of Fire to deal damage to everyone. You can have, well, first things I suppose, as I upgraded the bone shards to shrapnel. This way I was shooting the person in the first position, and then once I had enough wrath, either from dealing or taking damage, I could just set everyone on fire. And this method also helps unlock the blood phantasm.
Only I know how to unlock the true potential of necromancy.
I mean, I think I'm pretty okay, Aratus. Don't sell me short, bro. Yeah, those are the most efficient ways, I think, to unlock the ghoul. I went with the Rain of Fire method because it also helped me unlock the blood phantasm, which again is to deal 75, or to use 7,500 wrath. So together, that helped. I was also unlocking the bone golem at the same time by picking up bones, because again, I mentioned this is the last one that I unlocked, and it was a pain. I had to go through an entire cakewalk campaign. But the ghoul. Fun fact, the ghoul has received the most changes since her inception. She used to eat her friends, but now she eats her foes, and it's a lot better. But similar to the headhunter, she is a physical damage death dealer, glass cannon, and all. She does, unlike the headhunter, have a very helpful buff with repelling mark, 8 attack, 8 dread, 8 luck, 8 evasion for 2 turns. Doesn't stack, but you just throw it on someone in the first turn, and then you go to town. I do like upgrading it so it lasts 3 turns, just because, turns get expensive later on. She can heal herself by biting allies. I usually don't do that. This is what I mentioned earlier, where she can instantly kill an enemy. Her wrath ability here. Oh, it was nerfed again. Instantly kills an enemy with less than 25% vigor. Can be upgraded to be 35% vigor though, wow. Now, this will make it so that enemies no longer leave parts, which is new. Well, it used to actually be on this ability. Or this one? This one. So it's up to you if you want to just eat something or to get the part from it. Once you have eat someone, however, after you have eaten them, you do gain vigor, attack, dread, luck, and evasion. It's a huge buff. But if you're dying, you can devour that buff with the jest to restore to full health. Very useful. There's also the ghoul's unique item, which makes it so you start with this buff, the lunch break buff, as if you had eaten somebody. It is so strong. If you find it, highly recommend trying out the ghoul. You just become a powerhouse. It's a lot of fun. But again, incredibly squishy. Make sure your ghoul has support. And we've arrived at the last 2 characters. Finally, because my throat really hurts. The Unfrozen. Oh, I love this character. The way that you unlock them is that you complete the campaign in more pain. The game's out now, so there are 5 floors. You did get credit for this if you did it in early access with only 3 floors, but now you just gotta go all the way. The Unfrozen's feature is, if the initiative of the Unfrozen is higher than that of the target, deals additional 5% damage for each point of difference. I mentioned this earlier with the Fallen dhampir, and her ability to remove all initiative, and the wraith's ability to remove all initiative. So, those are 2 synergies that you can have with the Unfrozen.
Am I in the mood for terror or lethality today?
¿Por qué no los dos? Let's do both. The Unfrozen also can reduce initiative himself. His Wrath ability deals damage to 2 enemies and causes them to lose 3 initiative for 2 turns, and his Ice Wave deals damage to the first 2 enemies and causes them to lose 2 initiative for 2 turns. So he can do it himself, he's just not quite as effective. The Unfrozen can fit into almost any composition I found. Almost. He is so good. Of course, besides reducing enemy initiative to make them more slow, to make them slower, he can also use his Ice Spear to interrupt stances and any of the positions, which can be very helpful. That's how I like using it. Or he can remove armor if you have a physical team that needs to deal more damage. But speaking of more damage, he can pull enemies towards him and cause them to receive 30% more damage. Or 40 if you get that upgrade. Oh, he's so good. He can also, he's the only one that I'm aware of that can destroy traps. And he can do some mean things to people that did deploy the traps. He can also basically put a friend in an ice cube that causes them to heal every turn, but they're frozen so they can't do anything. And I think it's also one of the few ways to remove ignition, I believe. And it completely negates damage, so it's like a paladin bubble if you're familiar with that. Or timeout. That's another way to think of it. I love the Unfrozen, great character, but again, takes some time to unlock because of beating the game in more pain. And last, but not least, the Black Widow. The Black Widow also is unlocked by beating the game in more pain, and I must admit, I've never really gotten the Black Widow to work. She's strong, she's rather durable, and she can heal herself by putting herself in the cocoon, but the only thing I've ever really found huge success for is that she can be used to completely remove all enemy block and ward. This doesn't sound powerful, but later on, there are enemies that start the battle with 3 block and 3 ward, and just burning through that immediately is incredibly helpful. She can also reduce enemy armor and resistance for a few turns. Mine is 24, wow, that got buffed. I think they used to be 18, right? So she can do that to help support. She can also remove luck and evasion, which becomes very helpful on some of the floors where you have incredibly evasive enemies that crit you like half the time. I'm not tilted or anything. But her feature is the part of me that I've always tried to get work, and that is that every ability she uses on an enemy will apply Spider Venom. Every turn, the target loses 2%, 1% for bosses, of Vigor and Sanity for each stack of Spider Venom, which can stack up to 5 times. This can be incredibly powerful at wearing down your foes, but only if the Black Widow survives and is able to actually hit things instead of hide in her cocoon, which is her defensive cooldown.
My personal touch.
Only your personal touch? So, and as a frontliner, of course, going into her cocoon, she will redirect any attack that goes to the person directly behind her. So if you have an incredibly vulnerable character in your second slot, like maybe your Banshee, so that you can use Howl and stun people, the Black Widow can protect her better than others could. But at what cost? I have lost count of the Black Widows I have lost. 5, 6, it's a lot. Her ultimate ability will cast a web over all enemies for 2 turns, preventing movement. I personally think this is kind of weak, but you can use it to remove all initiative if you like, or you can use it to enhance Spider Venom by a lot. 2 times, in fact. So you basically double the Spider Venom on enemies. Again, she's kind of in her own little world of doing stuff, but she does have some synergies. And that is it for all the creations. We did it! We talked through all of them. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you learned a thing or two about a thing or two. If you have any questions, of course, leave a comment down below and I will do my best to answer it. What are you looking forward to playing? What are you looking forward to concocting as the Supreme Necromancer? Let me know. And of course, make sure you subscribe and hit that stupid bell if you want to see our series, The Rise of the Supreme Necromancer, starting tomorrow. I hope to see you around. Bye-bye.